We have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Kelley here. Kelley, you're behind a pretty interesting new company that is helping a lot of people with home ownership, and I think it solves a great niche. And you've got two exciting products that are rolling out now that are really going to push this mission to the forefront. Because today, especially with spending and with credit cards, you get a lot of rewards, towards travel and travel benefits. But people are in their homes most of the time, and the rewards needs to shift. And you're really focusing on balancing that. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me. Really excited to chat. Big fan of the show. Excited to tell you more about what we're doing at Mesa.
Awesome. So just going to the beginning, how did your interest in being an entrepreneur and entrepreneurship in general, how did that passion begin?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's kind of funny, but I'm a former fat little kid, so like that, when you're little, like everybody, right? Like that can be, traumatic or whatever you want to call it, and so that shaped my identity for good or bad. When you're, at that age and you don't feel like you're good enough or whatever it is, right? Like that can then lead you to overcompensate with sort of boundless ambition, right? And I think for me, like, that can certainly come out in a lot of bad ways. And so I found that entrepreneurship was a really good way to channel that, and that, being ambitious is great for that, and you can do a lot of good in the world. And so I think more than anything, that's probably just from a personality type, what got me into it. And then got very lucky to work at some great companies and learn from some great people, and just, kind of fell in love with it, working at startups.
So you got a role at Uber pretty early on in operations. What made you interested in working over there, and how impactful was that to how you operate today?
Yeah, I mean, Uber was a blast. Like I got very lucky and got a job there, and just applied cold and on their website. But I think what drew me to Uber was, and this was like, Travis Kalanick would always say, is like, great recruiting is great marketing. And like Uber had great marketing, like Uber ice cream and all the cool things you're doing, and you could see the cars, right? And so that drew a lot of really smart, hardworking people there, and just I think a very particularly entrepreneurial type. Uber just had a very like highly decentralized culture where it was very entrepreneurial. And so that, really taught me more than anything to how to be an entrepreneur. And obviously got to work with some amazing people, do some really cool things. But I think that, kind of taught me how to think like an owner and how to think like an entrepreneur. And that's certainly a key part of the Uber culture that I want to bring here. One of our values is act like an owner. I think that's something Uber did really, really well.
Did you feel like you were really able to be entrepreneurial inside the company? Like that was something that was possible?
Yeah, it sounds crazy even when it was, 50,000 people or whatever, but just the way it was structured was like Uber was, very decentralized. And so everybody kind of was the CEO of their own little part of the business. And so, and whether you were on like the policy or comms team, even that. So I think it just had this like very cool culture that created a lot of entrepreneurial thinking where everybody did feel like they were an owner. And I think that's a big part of, you want to give people a really compelling, big mission to go solve. I think that's a huge part of getting great talent, right? But then you got to empower them to do those jobs, right? Because if you're doing somebody's job for them, like, why did you hire that person? And so I think that's one of the reasons why, like, and Uber, I think, hired better than anybody. Just like from a process, like how they recruited, how they interviewed, and so that's something we brought here, and we've been able to attract and retain really, really great folks. And I think those are kind of two key parts of it, like really compelling mission, as well as like empower people in their day to day, so that the people closest to the problems are the ones actually making those decisions.
Mhm. Makes sense. So what made you decide to go and build a company tackling a lot of health issues and making it that's something that's people can earn money from? How did that originate?
Yeah, so that my first company, came out of like while I was working at Uber, I got the first Apple Watch, and I kind of knew, in the same way like Uber took advantage of smartphones, like I was like, okay, this is then a big platform shift. Like, what's interesting about this? Like, what could you build on it? And again, like, as a former fat little kid, like health and wellness is a really big part of my life. And so kind of a combination of those two things, it was like, hey, like, there's a world where, you should be rewarded for being healthy. And now that we can actually track what that means, like there's a way to do that with your employer or your insurance company. So kind of a combination of just my own kind of personal passions, I think sort of the right place, right time of a shift in the world. And again, I think like, being at Uber, like kind of taught me how to think about those things of like the technology at Uber that was really valuable was like there was a GPS in your phone for the very first time. And obviously they took advantage of that along with other companies. And so thinking about smart wearables or whatever you want to call them at that time, sort of similar thinking.
So you figured out really a way to pay people to exercise. It was kind of unique.
Yeah, step one is you got to be able to track that stuff, and then yeah, and again, like I think about like you know, generally just learn from people that are much smarter than me and really successful. And I think I may be misattributing this, but I think it was the Skype founder who said something like innovating in zeros is like his thing, where it's like making something 10 times cheaper or 10 times more expensive. And so like similarly, like I think how I've always been drawn to things is like kind of mapped to consumer budgets. Like wherever people spend the most money, I think that's probably where you can do the most good. Right. And so you think about that's food, transportation, healthcare, there's housing, there's kind of big buckets like that. And so, healthcare and housing, and particularly at that time, this was during, 08, healthcare was very top of mind and it still is unfortunately a huge issue. So combination of just like, hey, this feels like a big compelling mission, like this is a worthwhile quest for your life, right? And that I think is another way. I just think it's another thing that's really important to attract great people. Like people want to work on a problem that they feel good about, that is big and important, and they think's doing a lot of good in the world. And obviously, like your health, it's like there's a ton of cliches, right? It's like a healthy person has 100 wishes and an unhealthy person has one. And so like without that, you really don't have much. And so I think it's such a foundational thing. And so I think it's always great to see people trying to make that.
Definitely. And it seems like, Kelley, a theme throughout like your career so far has been trying to make people's lives better in the multiple different companies. It's just something you really care about a lot.
Yeah, again, I think it's like, you're not here that long. Like, how do you put it to the best use, right? And you think about your own life and mission statement and your own personal values. And yeah, for me, it's like, hey, sure, I'd like to make the world a better place, right? And so, starting with, you pick your area. There's tons of problems out there. So yeah, I think like if you do that, I think there's tons of ways to build really great, big, interesting businesses as well. So try to align those two things with my own sort of personality and type, and startups are just a great way to do that.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's a good way to try something new and get it out there. Um, so you got that company wound up getting acquired. What were you thinking was going to be the path for you after that happened?
Um, That's a good question. I don't know. I think I knew I wanted to start something again, just like again, like, we'll probably keep starting companies because I just find there's always interesting problems and things out there. So, that was part of what drew me to Austin was like, hey, you know, my bet was like, hey, that's going to be a new kind of shift that, during COVID and all of that, right? Like all the people moving there, so many smart people, so much money moving there. So, wasn't sure what that was yet. I knew it would kind of fit into that framework of like, hey, it's going to be something really big with the right why now and all of these things. And, have a million ideas. Like to say the best way to have a good idea is just have a lot of ideas because eventually a good one's going to show up. So, certainly for me, it was like the plan was to do something like this, and just got lucky and met Peyton, my co-founder, and he and I have just, been building together for years, see the world in the same way, like particularly as we think about talent and how to build a great company, just not just great business. And, learned a lot about like consumer financial products. And that, certainly led to, uncovering, I think, the right problem of what we call the home cost crisis, which you kind of talked about, which is just like homeownership's never been more unaffordable. It's a third of people's income and going up every year. And as a country, particularly relevant in a election cycle, like we spend more on home ownership, 6 trillion plus than we do on healthcare, national defense, and social security, right? And so those are obviously big line items in the budget, but this is an even bigger problem and one that impacts every American, whether you own a home or not. And so for me, it was like, okay, that is a problem that's worth solving because if you even make a 1% improvement, you're going to make the world better and you're going to have a really, really big business.
Was there like a specific experience that you had that made you like want to improve home ownership?
Yeah, so really it was working in consumer finance. So, think credit cards, rewards, things like that. And you're always looking at consumer budgets and spend and like how do you capture wallet share? And you realize just how much money people spend on their home, right? And everything in the credit card and reward space, like I think you talked about at the top of the call, was it's very travel and dining, it's business traveler focus. When actually you realize like there is this homeowner demographic, there's this huge chunk of spend. And you think about all the money you spend on your home, it's the most important thing and the things in it. And you really don't get anything back for that. And so again, if you want to solve this problem of a home cost crisis, I believe the best way to do that is by giving you value back for every dollar you spend on your home. And so all we're trying to do is just bring what people like about credit card style benefits and rewards, but bring them to all these financial products for homeowners, which puts more value back in their pocket and makes every home more affordable and rewarding.
Yeah, I also never really understood why like so much of it's geared towards travel when like that isn't the number one priority for most people. and you would think they would want to focus on their home, and then maybe next would be like the car benefits along those two. Like those are the two biggest purchases. So I think what you're doing makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that need it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's just, credit cards are still relatively new. Chase Sapphire is not that old. Amex is obviously a historic company, but, travel and dining has kind of been the first card that got turned over there. And it makes a lot of sense. Business travelers are great customers because it's usually subsidized by an employer. They spend a lot. They're high credit, high FICO, all that good stuff. But you think about a homeowner, it's kind of the same thing of, high spend, high credit, but just happens to be kind of in a different vertical. And, they want different things. Like for us, it's a free big box membership. It's not free TSA pre-check, right? And so just kind of meeting the homeowner where she is. And that's, kind of the millennial mom and dad. She just wants something different than the corporate business traveler. So just kind of recontextualizing those things. But, I think that you'll start to see that as kind of housing and, that homeowner as a very interesting demographic going forward.
What would you say, Kelly, are like the couple of ways that you can really make homeownership much easier for people through what you're doing? Like, what are the most important ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first and foremost thing is make it more affordable, right? Like, that's the biggest verdict. It's not that it's complicated. I mean, sure it is, right? But I think the biggest thing is like a lot of people would love to own a home, they just can't afford it. And so I think that's where we focus is like, hey, people are spending a lot on their homes. I just want to give some of that back to them, which is going to make their home more affordable, but it also make homeownership more accessible for people that aren't homeowners yet. Because if you can make every home in America 1 or 2% cheaper, that has huge downstream impacts on people that want to get into homeownership, on homelessness, on all these things, right? So really for me, like that, I think is the biggest problem in homeownership. There's a ton of other ones. And I think there's great companies that are helping to solve those too. Like I think this is where we want to focus to try to solve this piece, but it's going to take a lot of really great companies that are focused on different parts of the problem, right? Like I think like there's Foyer, which, know the founder there well, and, they're helping you save for a down payment, which is another big part of it, right? Or Asusu does a great job with credit building and rent reporting, right? To help people build their credit for that. And so there's no shortage of problems here. But I think the one I'm most excited about, and I think we're uniquely positioned to solve is how do we, when you're a homeowner and you're already spending a bunch of money, how do we put some of that value back in your pocket?
So you had a 9.2 million seed funding round, and you came out of stealth. I think you're right when you announced that. What was the purpose of that? Why was that kind of the right amount of capital to bring in? What do you want to accomplish with that round?
Yeah, so that's really, a couple things I think is to, bring the card to market. Credit cards are really powerful. They're very hard to build. And so like you need infrastructure partners, you need rewards partners, you need distribution partners, you need a lot more people than just B2B SaaS. So that's why a seed round is bigger for a credit card company than something else. So both just from the what's required to bring a card to market, as well as just, to build the team around that, and for us, like that was sort of what we needed. And again, like, I think we've put together a world-class team. Like we have some incredible operators from Robinhood and Cash App and places like that. And so, you need great backers to help you do that. And so we've got some really world-class investors that get our long-term vision. They understand what we're trying to build and are helping us do that because it's a lot harder to build a business like this. Like couldn't do it as my first company. Like you just couldn't, right? And so I think, that's part of the benefit of starting multiple companies as you build the network and trust and have the, track record or whatever you want to call it so that people will give you more money earlier on than they probably would otherwise.
Yeah. So one of the aspects of this, I think that's been reported in like TechCrunch and other places is like the mortgage marketplace that you're trying to build. What do you think needs to be done there? And what does that really mean, a mortgage marketplace?
Yeah, so really the purpose there is like, whether the card is kind of capturing all your spend on an ongoing basis, but one of your obvious biggest expenses as a homeowner is when you actually get your mortgage or refinance, right? And so that's the biggest financial commitment of most people's lives. And yet you don't get any value for that currently, right? You basically do a Google search for the lowest rate, and that is kind of the process today. And like, hopefully you're getting the lowest price, right? And so what we want to do there is, again, like at that moment of a really big transaction, we want to give you value back to that. We want to bring credit card style benefits and rewards to a mortgage that has, historically never had anything attached to it. So that's the spirit of that, where you're going to get 1 point per dollar on the loan, meaning you get $1 million mortgage. You just got 1 million points, which is, roughly $10,000 worth of value versus getting 0 elsewhere. So that is great for a consumer. It's also good for everybody, right? In that it's making every home in America potentially, call it 1% more affordable.
How does that work in terms of the like what you can offer people? Like how do those types of deals work where you have this ability to give an incentive here? Like how does it benefit the other side too?
Yeah. So again, it is, effectively advertising for the, brokers and lenders there, right? And so they want to reach that homeowner. And so we're able to give some of that back to the homeowner, and it benefits the homeowner, obviously, but it also benefits those, brokers or lenders on the other side because they're able to reach the consumer they want.
Nice. So, right now this problem I think you mentioned earlier, it's a 6 trillion annual spend problem. It's a huge problem. With what you're building currently, how much of an impact do you think you can have, let's say over a 5 to 10 year horizon? Like what does that look like with what you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, look, like, you don't start a company to aim low, right? Like, we think there's 6 trillion in spend out there. I don't want most of it. I want all of it because if we get all of it, that means we can give a lot of it back to the consumer. So there's no reason why all of that should not come through us so that we can put, call it 1 or eventually 2% of that back in consumers' pockets, right? And again, if we do that, we've built a generational business and we've made a lot of homeowners' lives far more affordable and rewarding, not to mention what it'll do for people that want to get into homeownership and all of those other things. So that is certainly our intention, right? And that's why, one of our cultural values is go big or go home, right? And so for us, it's like we want to work with the best investors and the biggest partners who share our level of ambition because this is a huge problem and really only gets solved at scale, right? Like, yes, you can help a homeowner every day, but we solve the home cost crisis by solving it at scale, right? And fixing some of the bigger issues that are there. So that's certainly our ambition over the next few years. And I think that's what's drawn great people to help us do it.
So you mentioned like Kelly a bit earlier how difficult it is to actually launch a company like this. But what goes into building to making a credit card, like even making something like this possible?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, and so, I'm very fortunate we have great people. Like my co-founder, Peyton, has built 20 financial products. So, couldn't do this without him or Tina on our team, who she built the Built card. So, and it was an American Express, so like really understands these products. But it's just very challenging because it's a big flywheel that once you start spinning it, it doesn't stop, but getting it going, it's kind of like pushing a merry-go-round to get it going, right? And so you have like infrastructure partners, you need a bank, you need a processor, you need all these things just to be able to turn something like this on. You need a, loyalty ledger and all these things. You need rewards partners, right? Because, points are great, but they're as good as where you can redeem them. And so, you need partners who want to give more value to the consumers, and then you need distribution. And so, who we work with a lot of really big lenders and servicers and home warranty providers, like huge companies that can help us scale and help us, build the platform we want to build. But you kind of need all three of them, and you need them all at once. And so it's very hard, it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? And so that's one of the reasons why there's just, three different sides to that marketplace almost. And you need to get a lot of like momentum on each of them in order to make it happen. So that's one of the hard things about it. Now, the good news is like that builds a pretty strong moat. And again, once you get the flywheel spinning, you have more customers, which means more brands want to work with you, which means you're going to get more value to give to customers, which gets you more customers, and then it just keeps spinning and spinning. So we're now starting to see the flywheel spin, which is really exciting. But obviously, it took us, like any company, we kind of did it in record time, but it just takes a while to get there.
How do you see the types of partnerships in this industry for what you're doing? Because like the Built partnership was a really strong one that was very different, but had a different niche for what the card was. It was focusing on renters and people like that. How do you see potential partnerships in this space for you guys?
Yeah, I think what we've been able to do with some really big partners, and I think what's resonated is, look, like we are building a homeowner loyalty network where at its core, we're going to help you acquire, retain, and engage the most valuable consumer in the world, which is the homeowner. And so if you're a brand that wants to reach homeowners, whether you're a financial partner like a lender or a home warranty provider or a consumer brand like home improvement or home decor, that really resonates because not only are there a lot of these customers, they're incredibly valuable in a very targeted way. We're like, we can help you reach a lot of homeowners, which is exactly what those brands want in a very direct way, like those examples. And then some indirect things like health and wellness, like, hey, you may not only serve homeowners, but homeowners are high spend, high income, high credit score. Like they're a great customer for you. And so I think that's what's really resonated with partners. And it allows us to build a business because, you have one of the biggest companies in the Fortune 50 home improvement brand can now work with the biggest lender in the country, but only because of Mesa in the middle. And so like, that's one of the things that I've been lucky enough to learn from great people around like how you do partnerships. It's kind of like how do you make yourself that essential linchpin in the middle where it's 1 + 1 = 10, but only because of you. And so as a small company, that helps you grow really quickly and makes you far more valuable than you'd be trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I mean the barrier to entry, like you touched on before, seems to be pretty difficult for people and cost a lot too. And I think that your value proposition is very unique. Like I haven't heard of anything else like this, which is great. So, Kelley, like we touched a little bit on it before, but what's your big picture vision now? Like if you had to kind of state some of the things that you want to accomplish, in your near future, like what is this big picture vision for you?
Yeah, I think for us, like we want to, our mission's very clear. Like we want to make home ownership more affordable, rewarding. And so the way we think we can do that is like we're going to give you value back for every dollar you spend on your home. And so for us, it's like step one is like we want to make sure we're building a platform that captures all of that spend, whether you spend it on, taking out a HELOC or you spend it on your credit card or you're taking out a mortgage or whatever it is, so that we can then give some of that back to you. So that's the next 5 years for us. There's so many ways that can go, right? Just from the products we have now for future products. So that's our vision where it's like, hey, you come to us, every dollar you spend in your home, you're going to get a ton of value back for it. And your home's more affordable. And like that to me is going to make every consumer's lives better, but it's also going to build a generational business.
Well, I mean, that was all the questions I had, Kelley. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think you're building something that's going to really help a lot of people. So I'm definitely excited to see how it scales and how you put the funds you've raised to good use. So looking forward to what's next and wish you much success. Thanks for coming on.
No, I really appreciate you having me on. This was great. Like I said, huge fan of the show. So yeah, thank you again. Looking forward to, keeping you updated on the journey.